Good morning again, beloved community. As you can tell and feel, probably, we are beginning a new journey again, right? Today, we begin and step into Advent, the season of longing, waiting, aching, and trusting. And the word that meets us at the doorway is hope. But hope is not a soft word. Hope is not a vague, inspirational feeling. Hope is not optimism dressed in religious clothing. Hope in Scripture is a force, a posture, a stubbornness, a rebellion. Hope is this fierce, divine refusal to bow to despair, to surrender to empire, to believe that darkness gets the final word. And before hope ever took root in Mary's womb, before hope ever kicked beneath her ribs, before hope ever cried in the manger, before hope ever walked into Galilee or Jerusalem or Calvary, hope began in God. Hope is part of the very nature of the divine. Hope is the energy of divine imagination. Hope is the pulse of God's dreaming. It's the rhythm of God's liberating heart. Which means that when we say hope begins in the body, we are not saying that Mary invented hope. We are saying that God placed God's own hope in Mary's body. Because God believes that human bodies, especially the ones the world disregards, are worthy vessels of divine possibility. The angel appears in a small, ordinary town. We know the story. Nazareth, a place a Roman didn't really care about, a place that empire forgot, a place where people's lives were stretched thin beneath the weight of taxation, poverty, and occupation. And this messenger shows up, not in a palace, not in a place of power or the halls of government, but in the home of a teenage girl. A girl whose body was not valued by her culture, a girl whose voice did not count, whose neighborhood was considered nothing, a girl that the empire would have called an undesirable. Undesirable, that word stuck with me this week. I was on TikTok, like some other people on TikTok, and I was listening to someone talk about their neighborhood, and they referred to the people in their neighborhood as undesirables. That word hit me. It stung, and apparently it stayed, because our world is so too quick to decide who is desirable and who is not, who matters and who does not matter, whose life is worthy and whose life is expendable, whose body is holy and whose body is a problem. And the more I sat with that word undesirable, the more the Spirit nudged me toward Mary. Because, beloved, Mary, this poor young brown Jewish girl, would have been labeled undesirable by her society and by ours. But here's the gospel truth. Mary is desired by God. The undesirable becomes the vessel of divine desire. The overlooked becomes the location of God's uprising love. The ones pushed to the side becomes the center of a liberation story that will shake empires and overturn the powers. That's good news. This is the decolonial lens of Advent, that God chooses the body the empire discards. God draws near to the bodies patriarchy polices, and God delights in the bodies society fears. And hope, true hope, begins in that revelation. Now, Mary is not a porcelain figure or a silent participant in someone else's story. Mary is not meek or fragile or passive. Mary is a young black and brown coated body living under foreign occupation, much closer to a young black girl in America or a young Palestinian girl today than to the sanitized images we often grew up with. Mary is a person whose body empire tries to control, whose life patriarchal norms restrict, and whose future is shaped by systems that she did not choose. And this is where God arrives. The holy refuses the halls of domination and chooses the margins. God refuses power as empire and chooses the underside of empire. In Mary, God declares the liberation does not come from the top down, but from the bottom up. Sounds like organizing language a little bit. This is a queer reading, a black prophetic reading, a decolonial reading. the truth that undoes oppressive theologies and restores the gospel to its roots. Marginalized communities, brown, queer, trans, migrant, have always understood Mary intuitively. God shows up where the world least expects God to be. In the poem Annunciation, Denise Levertov says that the engendering spirit did not enter her without consent. God waited. God waited. Can we sit with that for a minute? God, the creator of galaxies, the one whose yes sparked the cosmos, waited for a young woman's yes. It's not a forced story. This is not coerced holiness. This is not God manipulating a powerless vessel. This is consent. Courageous, embodied, sacred consent. And consent, we know, is only real if the person has the power to say no. You cannot truly consent or submit if you do not have the authority, the autonomy, and the agency to refuse. So when Mary says, "Let it be with me according to your word," she is not surrendering to domination. Mary is submitting to God's rebellion. Mary is aligning herself with the holy uprising even before she understood its magnitude. She knew, but I don't know if anybody could understand the magnitude of what God was up to. So Mary's yes is submission, and I know we don't like that word sometimes, but submission to liberation and not to oppression. Mary said yes. When Mary said yes, she faced the possibility of being rejected by her family, rejected by Joseph, the man she was to marry, rejected by her community, and rejected by those she had loved her whole life. The truth is, when we say yes to God's liberating love, sometimes we too face rejection. Sometimes the people we love cannot understand our liberation. Sometimes communities prefer a sense of safety over justice. Sometimes friends prefer comfort over truth. And sometimes even family chooses familiarity over freedom. Love, when it becomes embodied, can disturb the very relationships that once supported us. James Cone taught us that God chooses the oppressed, but when God chooses the oppressed, when God aligns with the marginalized bodies and communities, those who benefit from oppression will not celebrate that. Mary's yes, in many ways, disrupts her life. And the truth is, we know this, a yes to freedom will always disrupt something. God could have chosen any method to confront the powers of the world, but God chose flesh. God chooses embodiment. God chooses vulnerability, blood, breath, bone, womb, and risk. The incarnation is God's declaration that our bodies matter, and marginalized bodies are holy ground. The incarnation is God's refusal to save the world from a distance, but God comes close. The incarnation is God saying, if hope is going to transform the world, it must become flesh. Hope, beloved, cannot remain an idea or a feeling. I feel hopeful. Hope cannot remain spiritualized or abstract. Hope must enter the world through bodies, our bodies. Now, before I go any further, I want to pause and name something, because I use the word embodiment a lot. The church uses it, theologians uses it, liberation scholars use it. But what do we mean when we say embodiment? When we talk about embodiment, we are talking about the truth that God meets us in our real lives, in our real lived physical, emotional, relational bodies, not in some disembodied idea or abstract spirituality. Embodiment is the refusal to separate the spiritual from the physical. It is a theological claim that God cares about what happens to actual people and actual bodies in an actual world. It's not theory. Embodiment says that our experiences matter, that our stories, our desires, our boundaries matter, that our trauma and our healing matter. The way we feel God is shaped by the way we live in our bodies. And the way we love God is shaped by the way we treat our bodies, our bodies and other people's. See, embodiment is rooted in the incarnation itself, the choice of God to take on flesh with all of its vulnerability, with all of its risk, with all of its limitation, all of its dignity. Scholars like Kelly Brown Douglas and M. Sean Copeland and James Cone, they remind us that bodies carry histories histories of race, gender, sexuality, disability, class, trauma, resilience. And because bodies carry history, embodiment is always political, right? Our bodies move through a world that is shaped by power, and so liberation must also be embodied. Embodiment is also a queer theological claim that queer scholars remind us that the body is not a problem to solve or a barrier to holiness, that the body is a site of revelation. I understand God and the divine by what happens in my body. The body is a place where God speaks, where God dwells, where truth rises. Our bodies are important. And even contemplative scholars remind us that embodiment is returning to ourselves. It's breathing, it's grounding, becoming present to the spirit in our own skin. So when I say embodiment, I mean the wholeness of who we are: spirit, flesh, breath, memory, identity, longing, wounds, and wonder. I mean the God who chooses to dwell not in theories or doctrines, but in people. When I say embodiment, I mean the truth that God's liberation plan needs bodies, needs our hands, needs our hearts, our boundaries, our voices, our courage. And I mean that every body is holy ground. It's a place where God's hope can take root. Now we know the story. We read it. We probably grew up hearing it, some of us. Then when the angel does something remarkable, before Mary can even respond, before she can process, before she can consent, Gabriel gives Mary a companion. I love this part of the story. The angel says, your relative Elizabeth in her old age has also conceived. So Mary is not alone in this impossible thing. God is not performing one solitary miracle, right? God is creating a community of impossibility. I think that's good news. God is creating a circle of embodied hope. Mary gets an Elizabeth, a friend, a witness, a co-conspirator, someone who understands. And beloved, this is where we must be tender in this time. Many cannot bear children. Some carry the ache of infertility. Some carry the grief of biology. Some carry the longing of a body that cannot do what the heart desires. And some even carry the pain of a world that cannot imagine their joy. Now, this story does not glorify childbirth as the only way that hope is born. I want to be clear about that. This story reveals that God creates community around the impossible, regardless of biology, gender, or ability. Elizabeth is a symbol of the truth that we do not carry joy alone, we do not carry grief alone, or change alone, and we do not carry hope alone. God gives Mary and Elizabeth, and beloved, God gives us each other. And I don't think we can sanitize this either. We must tell the truth that hope is not painless. Hope is not always simple, and hope is not always joyful. Even pregnancy in Scripture is never sanitized. It's messy, risky, exhausting, disruptive, and it changes everything. And hope is like that too, if we're honest. Real hope stretches us. Real hope, it interrupts us. Real hope asks something of us. And in a world like ours that is scarred by violence, shaped by fear, fragmented by politics, haunted by climate change and climate crisis, tired from years of loss, hope often feels like it's too much to carry. In the U.S., we are living in the days of rising authoritarianism, anti-trans legislation, white Christian nationalism emboldened, global war and displacement, economic anxiety, racial injustice, deep loneliness, and spiritual exhaustion. It's important to name them because hope does not ignore these realities. Hope does not even deny our grief. Hope does not silence our anger. But hope defies despair by acknowledging it and still choosing a future, not allowing all these things to take us down. God also does not colonize Mary's body. God does not force Mary into a destiny that she cannot confuse. I think that's important to note, that God invites Mary. The text says that God waits. God honors Mary's agency. And this is the pattern of the divine. God's liberation always makes room for human freedom. God's uprising love always opens space for consent. And Mary says, how can this be? Which is another holy truth, that questioning is not a lack of faith. Questioning is a part of hope. God, how is this going to happen? You see in the story that God makes room for Mary's curiosity. God even makes room for Mary's hesitation. And then God makes room for Mary's voice. And then Mary says the word on which this whole gospel turns, that it be with me according to your word. This is not fragility or passivity. This is the fiercest kind of courage. Mary says yes, knowing that her life will change forever, knowing that empire crushes hope bearers, and knowing that her body will carry a liberation that will cost everything. Mary consents to God's rebellion. This is good news, and hope takes flesh. Now, if we turn towards ourselves, if God still desires bodies, our bodies, if hope still requires flesh, our flesh, if liberation still needs consent, our consent, what does it mean for us to say yes? Cairn is a community that values justice, love, inclusion, imagination. But the question that Advent places before us is not, what do we believe? That's not the question. The question is, what will we embody? Will we embody hope in a culture addicted to fear? Will we embody inclusion in a world that's bent on exclusion? Will we embody justice in a nation built on inequity? A tenderness in systems structured around scarcity? Will we embody courage where white Christian nationalism tries to dominate? Will we embody truth where deception thrives? Will we embody care for creation in a time of devastation? God invites us to carry hope. But again, God waits for our consent. Hope, again, is not something that we can admire from a distance. Hope is something that we carry in our bodies. Let's bring us back to our seasonal theme. Love is a rebellion. Mary's yes is an act of rebellion. Rebellion against empire, against despair, against the theology of worthlessness, against anything that says that the world cannot change. And it's hard sometimes to believe that the world can change, but hope tells us that the world can change. Hope is not submissive or nice or quiet. Hope, real hope, disrupts, it resists, it overturns. Hope rebukes every system that refuses to honor life. Hope exposes the powers of this world for what they are. And hope declares that God's future is bigger than human fear. Mary's rebellion began in her body, and beloved, ours will too. The reality, James Cone talks about God choosing sides. That's also another part of our theme, right? That God and hope is not race neutral or gender neutral. Hope is not without context. In the Black prophetic tradition, hope rises from bodies that have endured the unendurable and still believes in freedom. Hope is survival, it's fire, it's hope, it's God dwelling in the breath of the oppressed. In queer traditions, hope is the courage to live truthfully in a world that tries to reshape, contain, or erase you. Hope is holy deviation from oppressive norms. Hope is a refusal to surrender your sacredness. And in the contemplative justice tradition, hope becomes vocation. It's how we live, right? Hope becomes action. Hope becomes a life lived outward in community, in service, in solidarity, in repair, and in justice. Hope moves, it builds, hope is sent. Hope, again, as I said with the children, hope becomes the works of our hands. It's something that we do. And I believe that, Cairn, we are continuing to be invited, not just to believe in hope, but to embody it, to continue to become a people whose yes makes space for God's rebellion of love to take flesh in the world, to become a community of Marys, courageous, imaginative, and willing, to become a community of Elizabeths, encouraging, companioning, and affirming, and even to become a community of Gabriels, messengers of dignity and liberation. And so, beloved community, hope begins in the body because hope first began in God. Hope takes flesh because God still chooses human lives through which love can rise. Hope is born whenever someone dares to say yes to God's liberating imagination. So may your yes be a seed of rebellion. May your body be a sanctuary of courage. May your life become a vessel of hope. May our community become a circle of Marys and Elizabeths bearing, birthing, carrying, holding one another into God's future. And may the God whose being is hope overshadow you, strengthen you, and rise within you as we begin this Advent journey together. And I'm about to close, but I think it's important to say clearly that God is still waiting. God is still waiting. Just as God waited for Mary's yes, God is waiting for ours. And I don't mean some vague, generalized yes, not some conceptual yes, not a someday when life slows down, I'll get to it. Not a yes that we say with our lips while our lives remain unchanged. I mean the yes that you already know. The yes that's been knocking inside of you. The yes that keeps returning in prayer, in dreams, in conversations, in your gut, in the quiet moments of honesty. Mary's encounter with the angel was mysterious. Some scholars say it could have been a vision, others some mystical encounter. Others say it was some inner summons from God. We don't know the mechanics. I don't think we need to. But we do know that the story says that Mary recognized the urge or the voice. She recognized the invitation. And beloved, so do you. Some of us in this room have already encountered the divine in ways we haven't fully named yet. A stirring or a pull, an inner knowing, a truth that keeps rising, no matter how often we try to push it away. And God is still waiting for that yes. Waiting for the yes that aligns your life in the direction of divine liberation. Waiting for the yes that moves you closer to justice, to truth, to compassion, to healing, to integrity, to joy, to embodied love. Again, I'm not talking about a yes that harms someone else. God does not call us to oppression. I don't know why I feel like I have to say that. Why we have to say that. God does not call us to domination. God does not call us to self-erasure. The yes God waits for is a yes that increases hope for others, a yes that expands liberation, that nurtures peace, a yes that honors your deepest truth. God's yes is a yes that creates life in whatever form God is asking it to grow in you. And like Mary, you may not understand the magnitude. You may not know what comes next. You may not even know how the story will unfold. You may only have a faint outline, the first nudge, a holy whisper. But you know enough to say yes. God is waiting for the yes that already is stirring in your spirit, the yes that you've been delaying because it scares you. I'm talking to somebody, I don't know who. The yes that you've been avoiding because it will change your life. The yes that requires courage and trust. The yes that requires stepping into a future that you cannot see fully. And here is the good news. You do not have to say, you do not do your yes alone. Mary had Elizabeth. You have this community. You have God's overshadowing presence. You have the Spirit's power at work within you. So as we begin Advent, the season of holy rebellion, the season where love moves against empire, not with empire, all right? The season where hope takes flesh, I invite you to listen again for the yes that is inside of you. The yes that is yours to give, the yes that only you can offer, the yes that God has been waiting for. Because hope begins in the body, and hope begins in your body. And now may the God whose being is hope, whose desire upends oppression, the same God whose love chooses the undesirable and calls them beloved, may that God be with you, empower you, and rise within you as you dare to say yes to the holy work unfolding in your life. Amen.